If you or someone you know is struggling with alcoholism or addiction, do not hesitate to reach out for help. You can find numerous free resources on our website, thebeginagainpodcast.com, and there are tons of resources and support networks available online, in person, or just a phone call away. You don't have to face this challenge alone. Welcome to the Begin Again podcast. I'm your host, Gary Menkes. On the Begin Again podcast, we delve into the inspiring journeys of individuals who have overcome alcoholism and addiction and emerged as true trailblazers in entrepreneurship, business, sports, and beyond. Through authentic, uplifting, and profound conversations with our guests, we aim to shatter the stigma surrounding addiction and demonstrate that recovery can be a catalyst for remarkable success, strength, and resilience. We firmly believe that by listening to these accounts, you will be empowered to unlock your own potential, instigate positive change in your life, and contribute to the creation of a better world. So, get ready to be inspired and embark on your own personal journey of growth with the Begin Again podcast. Welcome back to the Begin Again podcast. I'm your host, Gary Menkes, and today we welcome Derek Castleman. Derek is a writer, educator, scientist, and philosopher who struggled with drug addiction and alcoholism for over 15 years, while at the same time suffering from being bipolar. His life changed, however, when he found sobriety in 2018. From mental hospitals to rehab, county jail to sober living, 12-step programs would be his foundation, and he would eventually discover the path of Stoicism to be key to his sobriety and sanity. Posting online as the Sober Stoic, Derek recently released his first book, A Stoic Guidebook for Recovery, in which he shares not only his story, but also how the philosophical wisdom of the Stoics helped him to strengthen his journey in recovery. Derek, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. That's a crazy bio. I sound impressive, I guess.
You are impressive. That is impressive, right? Funny how our bios, we were just talking offline, how our bios have changed a little bit in the past few years.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely a huge change in the bios, I have to say.
Probably for the better. I speak for myself. And looking into your story, it looks like you have a heck of a story as well. Tell us. So how do we get here, Derek?
So I guess we usually start with our beginnings, right?
Yeah. Let's hear about
it. I grew up in Southern California. It was like this small town that was it's like about 60, 70 miles from Los Angeles. It was more of like even though it's Southern California and everyone thinks cities, this was more of like a rural town. Like we had like a bunch of cows and dairies and stuff out there. Everyone owned horses and rode horses around. Even my own parents owned horses back in the day. My parents, they had two kids. It was me and my brother. My brother's about a year and a half older than me. And it was definitely an interesting dynamic in the house. My dad was kind of like this total alcoholic, truck driver, swearing, constantly smoking cigarettes, And he was married to my mom, who was basically like this lady who went to church every Sunday, taught Sunday school, or never drank, never smoked or anything like that. It was just kind of like they were the exact polar opposites of them that, like, as I got older, it was just like, dang, like, how did they ever even survive with each other? It was weird. It was like my mom, like she told me later in life, it was because like she found God like right after they got married. I guess because she was like Christian. So like her faith basically told her that like she had to stick with my dad. And my dad was Catholic and his faith said that he had to stick with my mom. So even though they probably weren't right for each other in like the long run, like they kind of stuck it out for, I don't know, the good, but I probably think about like the worse for me and my brother in situations like that. Growing up, it's kind of interesting. Like when I was in rehab, I had kind of like this realization where I was realizing like addiction can come in many different forms. We always basically think that like addiction just has to be to some kind of substance. But when I look back at my life, my first kind of addiction was we kind of lived like a hard life with like my dad. Like he kind of like really struggled as a truck driver a lot, worked really, really hard, kind of beat up his body and stuff like that. For me, that kind of like sort of sent me into like this weird direction where I became obsessed with doing good in school, obsessed with like excelling in school. Like from when I was little in elementary school to pretty much, midway through high school, I was basically obsessed with always getting the best grades, always turning in everything, always doing good on every single assignment. And I look back at it now with like recovery, and I'm just like how was I was exactly acting like an addict, even from that age, And so it was one of those things of just like, I pretty much always kind of showed addiction in my life. And it was pretty much something that was consistent with me all the way up to the point of where my first introduction to a substance, and that was basically around my junior year in high school. I had a friend that I hadn't seen in years that came to my house, and we just went for a walk, and he started smoking a joint and offered it to me. I had never smoked anything, drank anything. I was like 16, I think almost 17 years old. And when you're kind of overly obsessed with school and doing good in school, at that point, I was like the top of the class. I was actually number one in my class. There's so much anxiety, so much stress. And when I had that first joint and I smoked it, like it all just disappeared. And it's that thing that like you often hear, like so many people that deal with addiction, like when we hit that, like when we get that first bit of like some type of substance in our body, it's just like, wow, like this is for me. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. That makes sense. Yeah. It's like the chase is on too. I remember you talk about substances, similar, total opposite on the school portion. When I was in grade school, when I was young, like in grammar school, I excelled like from the get-go. Like I'm talking early though. Like I was top of my class. In fact, there was like 3 or 4 of us that used to put in a special room every now and then. But it was we were like the 3 or 4 smartest kid in our entire grade. And by the time I got to high school, like I was barely passing because I never even bought books to school. Like I just totally gave up school. Like I hated it. I don't know if I really hate. I just, I love to learn. I still love to learn. I'm still learning now, but I kind of gave up in school. But, you touch upon the substances, and for me, alcohol was my number one, drug of choice, if you will. But I tried other substances, and I remember you mentioned the first time I remember I found cocaine. I was like, the chase was on. Like I think I've never gotten the buzz I got from the first time, and I chased it for the rest of the way. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, it's funny because I was listening to a previous episode where you guys brought up cocaine, and the reason why I say alcohol is my main DOC. It's the one that I struggled with the most. But the reason why I do say that drugs is a part of my story is that a huge portion of my time was spent smoking weed. I became like an everyday pothead. But the first time that I kind of realized that I had addiction issues was cocaine. Because it was one of those things of like, weed and drinking. They were kind of one of those activities that like I could do like sometimes on the weekdays, sometimes a few times on the weekdays, every single weekend. I was actually in grad school at this point. I kept up my grades from high school that weed and alcohol never got in the way. I got through my undergrad, I got into grad school. And it was when I was in grad school that I came across cocaine at the first time. And it was like you were saying, it was just like, God, this was all like instant. It was like I was instantly hooked. That was the first time that I realized that I had addiction, because that was the one where I can get like an 8-ball and basically do it in a night. It was one of those things of, I was going to shady places in the middle of the night, trying to like meet up with my dealer like at 3 or 4 in the morning so I could just pick up some more. And it was like in the middle of like doing that I was just like, oh man, like I'm actually addicted to this substance, and that was when I first realized I had addiction. The only problem that I had was I realized I had addiction, and then I did the stupid thing that every addict does, which is I'm just like, well, I'll just quit the cocaine and go back to just smoking weed and drinking alcohol
Right.
because, that was never a problem for me before. So like, might as well just go back to that and I'll just be fine. But of course, now it's like I have to smoke weed and drink alcohol like almost every day to
Yeah.
supplement like the whole fact of like replacing the cocaine. And
No, of
that's what,
course.
yeah,
No,
so
absolutely. You may have heard, but I've said like in a way, finding cocaine, like that sped up. Like I hated it. Like I hated cocaine. I saw it when I was a kid. I had people around me doing it in my house. Like I hated cocaine growing up. And then I found it. And so I was like this stubborn guy. Like I wouldn't have the guy's number for a while and I wouldn't call him, but one of my buddies would have it. And then I was off to the races and, was making them call like pretty much the whole night. But it allowed me to drink more. That's what I really kind of gravitated to, but it also sped up all of my trouble. It sped up my alcoholism, sped everything up. Last time I had a drink, I was 31 years old and 49 today. I went to
wow.
rehab when I was 26 years old and I thought my life was over. I mean, that's a young guy, but
Yeah.
you had mentioned you kind of started, I guess, well, at least relative to me, a little later in life. Not that it matters, but you said kind of just glossed over you went to rehab. How did we get to rehab?
Oh man, no, rehab, honestly, it came for me like many years later, like what really, really happened with my story was, like I said, I did really, really good in school.
Mhm.
Even though I was smoking weed and drinking alcohol, I still graduated fourth in my class. I went to college. I, was able to get my undergrad degree. I in grad school is when I started having kind of issues.
Mhm.
And because of the cocaine and because of the constant drinking and smoking weed, I had to leave grad school. It's not as much that like I failed my classes, I passed all my classes. It's just like I stopped showing up to the lab and doing my research. And so I kind of just ran out of time and got kicked out of grad school. And also when I was in grad school, I got married when I was in grad school. And around the time that all of this stuff was like kind of falling apart, my wife at the time, she actually got pregnant with my daughter, who's, like I said, my room that I'm in right now. And it was just kind of like, okay, well, I'm just going to leave grad school and I'm just going to go into teaching. And so my journey basically became like a teacher. And I was like honestly teaching for 10 or 12 years before I ever had to actually go into a rehab. I was one of those people that was basically definitely a functional alcoholic.
Sure.
I was able to basically like it's weird, like I said, it's once I had the issue with the cocaine, I basically became what like technically a pothead. I was smoking weed every single day and I was drinking like probably like 5 nights a week.
Yeah.
But I was still, as a teacher, like able to wake up, go in, teach my classes and stuff like that.
Right.
But like I said, it's like the problem that I had was that like I had definite addiction issues. I never really thought of anything about it at the time, but it's kind of crazy now that I'm in sobriety and I look back on like how bad of things that I was doing, because I was literally like waking and baking, smoking weed in the morning and actually going in and teaching my classes.
Yeah.
But since I was completely functional and doing it all, never got caught, was able to teach my classes, I never really thought that there was anything really bad that I was doing at the time. You
Right.
know, that's I think, one of the things that kind of like frustrates me in sobriety, and I don't want to sound bad saying this, but I just kind of think that like society has such like a laissez-faire attitude when it comes to smoking weed, that like they don't realize like the real psychological like issues that can go along with it, and kind of like the bad habits that you can form with it, because it's like, yeah, I was like teaching those classes, but like when I look back at it, I was high. So was I actually being an effective teacher at the time? Probably not.
Listen, I agree with you on weed. And it's gone the wrong direction, in my opinion. Like I did see a comedian, right? And the comedian he was weighing the, weed versus alcohol, and it was hilarious. He's like, I never hit a cop when I was stoned, I never assaulted a police officer when I was smoking a joint. I was like, all right, that's fine. But they don't talk about, they say, oh, it's not addictive. I don't need to be a doctor. Alcohol, marijuana is 1000% addictive to your brain. And go look at the science, especially as a young man or woman, a young person growing up before you're 25. Smoking weed is absolutely doing brain damage the entire way up. Okay, so I'm with you on weed, and for some reason, working in New York City now, you smell more weed than you do cigarettes now walking down the street. I don't know what's happened, but everything's upside down. But that's neither here or there right now. So I get it. But so you're kind of a functioning alcoholic, and listen, I can relate walking through life drunk and stoned as well. Like I was a wake and baker for a while, and I was a big weed smoker for a long time. So, but you kind of you do have you have the gift of self-awareness at some point. You're telling me you're way more self-aware than I ever was. I was the last person to realize that I had a problem. Everyone else around me knew I had a serious problem. I was the last person to realize that. But so you do this for a good 10 to 12 years, I think he had said. So what happens? Where do you hit the, what happens where you go from there to, all right, now you got to go to a rehab potentially?
Well, that's the thing though, is like, I am like you. I never did realize that I had a problem. We are actually very much alike, So what ended up basically happening was that my first wife that I was married to, I kind of like hopped around jobs, like me, her, with my daughter as a teacher. And I ended up in the Los Angeles area eventually, living in downtown LA, and we had like a shaky marriage. We married too young. We were definitely not right for each other. There was a lot of issues with our marriage, and it was falling apart. I was a bad husband to her. I was definitely, I might have been a functional alcoholic, but I was an alcoholic husband. I was verbally abusive to her. I treated her badly. I pushed her to the edge, and she left me. And when she finally left me, I was like basically living in downtown LA at the time. And in downtown LA, you basically have bars on every single, there's like 3 or 4 bars on like every single block. Like you can't just walk down the street without passing a few of them. And so that's when like weed stopped like being a part of my story. And I just went straight into drinking every single night at that point, And like I said, I really had no clue that I had an issue, everyone around me did, we would, as teachers, like sometimes we would basically go drinking, like after, like on a Friday after the week and stuff like that. And I remember like there was one time when like I got so wasted that like I blacked out and I ended up in like the drunk tank, like that night, and since it was just the drunk tank, I didn't do anything wrong or anything like that. The cops just wanted to make sure that I wasn't driving home or anything like that. I walked out of there and I just kind of thought like, okay, well, I just drank too much like that night. And I remember like a couple of teachers coming to me going like, dude, like you have alcohol problems, man. And I'm just like, what are you talking about, man? I just drank a little bit too much that night, And so I totally didn't see it. But then it's also crazy, like, how you don't see it, but also how like when the obvious signs are showing up, like you become accepting of it, because it actually started getting so bad that I was getting the trembling hands, like the tremors in the hands, the shaking hands in the morning. And at that point, I was definitely like, it was a little bit after I'd been thrown in the drunk tank. And after that point, like when I had the shaking hands, that's when I went over the edge. That was truly over the edge, because for me, what was crazy is being a complete alcoholic and not being willing to accept the fact that I was an alcoholic. Well, I can't say that I wasn't really accepting the fact that I was an alcoholic. I actually accepted the fact that I was an alcoholic because I had shaking hands. I knew that was a bad sign. I just wasn't willing to do anything about it because I was just completely addicted to the substance. So that's when things got into big trouble, because my solution to having shaking hands going into work was, well, why don't I just get drunk in the morning and get a really good buzz, steady out my hands. And then, because for me as a teacher, I need to write on the board. I can't write on the board with shaking hands. And so I was actually showing up to work drunk. That is the horrific thing now when I look back on it in recovery, to basically see like, wow, like I've seen footage of teachers being caught drinking in the classroom. And now like just looking back and going like, I was one of those people. So what led to rehab, honestly, was I got completely wasted one morning and I was driving into work and I sideswiped a car going into work. And so that was actually when I got my first DUI, sideswiped the car. Thank God the person was like safe and fine, you know? But my work basically found out that I was obviously showing up drunk to work. And they were the ones that forced me into rehab. They were basically like, oh, they're like, if you go to rehab, like you won't get in trouble. Your job will still be here. Just get yourself cleaned up,
Right.
you know, and you can come back here, you know. But that was my first rehab. It actually took me 3 rehabs. I'm like so many other people out there, man. It takes us like multiple rehabs before it actually makes sense, because the problem.
It's a disease. You're a sick guy. We can't forget that little part, right, man? Like it's it's not black and white. It's not a straight line. It's a squiggly up and down roller coaster, right, of life. And especially when you have substance abuse and alcoholism like you and I. Like,
Yeah.
we put ourselves through an awful lot, and we have the stories to unfortunately back them up. But we're also here today to tell about them, which is a blessing as well. So
Yeah.
you get a lifeline from work, which is I had one of those too. I went to rehab too, just to kind of save my ass, and then kind of worked. I wasn't sure, but so you get a lifeline, but that's your first rehab. So where do you go? Let's hear. You go 3 rehabs altogether.
Yeah.
What brings us up to 2018 when you get sober? What happens? How do we get to there?
Well, in between that time, what happened after that first rehab is, I think what can happen to so many people when they go to like their first rehab, which is, I've heard, this is why I love sharing stories and hearing people's stories, because you're just like, dang, I was the same exact way as you, which is like, I went to that first rehab. I got like 30 days sobriety in me, I get to go back to my job and I'm just like, I'm 30 days sober. I got this back under control.
Right,
I can just go back to drinking on weekends and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like, you do that at first, and like, you do that at first, and it's like, before you know it, you're doing it every day.
Yeah, it doesn't last long.
And before I knew it, I was back to drinking in the class, and they basically caught me and just fired me on the spot. They're just like, you're done then,
That's a tough day for you.
Yeah. And what was crazy about that was, because I worked there so long, the union kind of like saved my ass, and they made sure I didn't get stripped of my credential for like showing up to the class drunk. So a friend was actually able to find me like another job. And here I go again. And I'm like, I got another job. Everything's fine, and before I know it, I'm back to drinking in the classroom,
Right.
And then boom, that job fires me right on the spot. This time though, since I just started working from them, I get my credential stripped, That's what leads to my second rehab, because I'm just like, oh, I think I have an issue,
Yeah.
And so that actually leads to my second rehab. And this is, I think, where I'm saying is where I think that why weed becomes an issue, and it's just kind of looked down on too much, is that because I'm such a freaking addict, and because I have so many issues, I get out of that rehab and I'm just like, okay, my only problem is alcohol. And so I go back to smoking weed, and I'm doing that every day. And that's that whole thing. And I know it works supposedly for some people, but it's the term California sober, and I just do not like that term, which is just like,
to it.
yeah, it's just because
that's not what this podcast is about.
Yeah, it's just like, dude, you're still on a substance, And so I guess technically I was doing California sober, but it's just like to show you what that does to an addict like someone like me is that after a short while, I was basically right back onto like drinking alcohol because the weed wasn't enough,
Sure, sure.
And I was basically doing it every single day
Right.
again. This time, I'd met a woman when I was in downtown LA. We were living up in like this small mountain town. She was basically doing all of the work, like supporting us. I wasn't doing anything because I'd lost any ability to basically like work, like I tried to do some warehouse work, but like once I went back to drinking, I drank on the job at the warehouse and lost that job as well.
Right.
I had this horrible thing of like drinking on the job that like I just couldn't break. But
Yeah.
that's still like what's crazy, and it just shows you the obsession that we go through. Like all of these jobs I'm losing, all of these things, and I'm not realizing that it's this thing that I'm drinking that's killing me and ruining my life. And so I guess like to bring to you like what leads up to that moment. During all these times that I was at rehab, I'd actually been like, after talking to therapists and psychiatrists, they kind of realized like going back to all of these years, all the way back to my teenage years, I would have these ups and downs, these manic episodes,
Yeah.
all of these things like that were always going on. And that's when I finally got diagnosed with being bipolar. And there was one day that I was supposed to go down and actually see my psychiatrist. And I went down there and it was so packed and full in the waiting room. And I just got so fed up and like crazy with waiting around that I just stormed out of the office without seeing him. And like the meds that he had me on weren't working. And that's what I was like going to try to tell him. But just got drunk, just got wasted. And I was driving up the mountain to go back to the house again. What's crazy with me thinking about that is I was driving up the mountain to go back to the house, and my second wife, well, she was my girlfriend at the time. She's my wife now. We married in recovery. She actually stood by me the whole entire time, which makes her awesome.
That's cool. That does make her awesome.
I collided it with a rock on like the side of the mountain road, flattened the tire, bent up like the front of my car. And like I was trying to get like the spare tire on, and like the highway patrol shows up behind me to like help me out. And like they could smell the alcohol.
Yeah.
They looked in the vehicle. They also asked me for my ID. I had a DUI on my record. They knew everything.
Yeah.
And so I basically got busted with my second DUI. Spent a night in county and walked out of county, and I did the first thing any alcoholic would do, which is I went right down to the gas station and bought a bunch of beer.
Of course you
And yeah, of course. And I went out to this grass field that was right next to the freeway. And I was just sitting there, like drinking my beer. And I was looking at the cars passing down the freeway. And I just like kept thinking, I'm just like, look at all of these people that are out there. Every single one of them has a place to go. Every single one of them, they probably have friends. They probably have family. They have probably people that that want them to be in their lives. They have purpose. When I left county that night, I tried to call my girlfriend and she didn't want me to come home. Tried to call my mom. My mom was done with me after all these rehabs, after all these losing jobs. She was done. She already dealt with an alcoholic husband, and my dad had passed away like years before. And like she'd already dealt with that and she didn't want to deal with it anymore. My brother was done with me. My friends had like everybody, and I sat there literally in that field and I was looking at that can of beer in my hand and I was just like, all for this. That was that moment. That was that moment that I couldn't see through every single rehab, every single job that I lost, every single issue that I had over the years. I never saw that the problem was with the substances that I was putting in my body. And it was in that field, drinking that beer, that I was basically like, I was just like, for this, like, that's what's crazy. What you realize in recovery is you're just like, I have destroyed everything I've worked for, every hard thing I worked for in life. I've ruined every relationship, every person that I like, that I care for, all just for this, you know? I kind of laugh at the story when I tell it, is what I first said to myself was, I was just like, the first thing is that I realized now in recovery was that was my step one. That's ultimately the step one, is the moment when you realize your life is unmanageable and you're just like, it's just gone, you know?
Yeah.
For the first time. No rehab. None of the other two rehabs ever taught me that step one. I never, honestly, when I look at it, every single rehab I went to with reservations. That rehab was this was the first time that I was just like, done. I knew I needed to go to rehab. I know I needed to go get my bipolar back under control. And so there was a mall that was near the field. And I know that there's always like cops at the mall. So I'm like, I'm going to go down to the mall. I'm going to find a cop and I'm just going to wave around my beer can and drink in front of it and just act like a fool. Right. And get their attention. And so that's literally what I did, is like, I just went and I saw a cop car sitting there and I'm all just waving my beer cans and stuff like that. And they got out of the car like angry. And I was just basically like, I'm like, I need to get to a mental hospital right now. Like, I'm off my meds. I'm out of my mind. I need help. I need help. And so the cops, they obviously took the beer away from me. They didn't even care, dude. They didn't cite me for it or anything like that. They put me in the back of the car. They were like, you know, really, actually, they were really kind to me, where over the years, I really got a disdain for cops for dealing with them for my DUIs. That's what you build up a bitterness. You blame them, even though you're the one at fault, you know? Yeah. And so I built up, they treated me so nice. They brought me to a mental hospital. And the first thing I said to that mental hospital is like, I need to get my meds corrected. They're not working for me. You guys need to find me an inpatient rehab. I need to go to rehab. Every rehab I did before was outpatient. I know it works for some people. It can work for some people, but not for someone like me. Not someone like me that like, no, I need to be locked up, locked away. Yeah. And I need to deal with this issue myself. And I was just like, you got to find me an inpatient rehab, you know? And I sat in that mental hospital for like 2 weeks, like getting under like meds, getting my mentality stabilized, brand new meds, ones that actually work this time. And they found me like my first inpatient rehab. And I hear stories where people are just like, they talk about the days they did. I did 100 days in that inpatient rehab. You know, when I got in there, I was just like, I want to stay here as long as possible. They're like, we can do 90 days, but you're getting close to your 90 days. We can actually do like an extra 10 days, like if you want. And so I did 100 days in inpatient rehab, you know?
This is 2018.
Yeah. I always laugh. What's funny is I always tell people what's the best thing too about my story, or one of the funniest things about my story, is this is 2018. My sober date is 4/20/2018.
That's right.
You know, it's like the most ironic sober date to basically have, especially with how like my whole journey into this madness began with smoking weed and led to all of those things over all the years, you know?
Yeah. I mean, listen, you really described the regression of alcoholism so well. And for those civilians, if you will, that aren't afflicted with alcoholism like you and I are, it's hard for them to get their head around. Like, they don't grasp it. You know, people that are there or are alcoholic completely get it. Like, I'm with you every single step of the way, you know, but I'm fascinated too that you go out to that field after getting in trouble again. You're out in the field and you look and you see other people and maybe you start comparing, but for some reason you're given that moment of clarity. You're given that clarity where, even though you've been in rehabs and you've had, I'm sure, plenty of education, both in and out of the rooms of rehab and other meetings or what have you, but you're given that clarity right there. And I think it's beautiful too. And I'm kind of picturing you going down this, big happy guy waving around a beer to the cops. But you're like, hey, I'm done. I'm a sick guy. You got to take me here. And then when you get to the hospital, you tell them that you're an alcoholic, and, you know, you're given the gift of the surrender, and it's coming through so clearly. And I just love that, you know, even after 2 weeks in the hospital, and then you get to the rehab, and you're like, how long can I stay here? I think it's, you know, it's really a beautiful thing, but it also speaks to, you know, that was the last time you had a drink, correct? I mean, that was
Yeah.
5 years ago, you know, and
Yeah. Yeah.
given that gift of sobriety, you said step one, you're powerless over alcohol, your life is completely unmanageable. Tell us where you go from here after when you get out, day 101, if you will.
Well, you know, what happened was I got up to the 100, but like right when I was getting like right on that last day, I had to go to court for my DUI.
Yeah.
And the judge was so pissed at me. You know, I didn't even know what the citations were. You know, I never even got to see it. I didn't even have a mailing address. I didn't even know. They cited me for driving under the influence on psychiatric meds. So you can get actually cited for both of those things. I didn't know that, you know, because I admitted that I was on psychiatric meds to them. They cited me for hitting the rock. That's what's crazy. They actually cited me for hitting the rock.
Wow.
But I also didn't know that my BAC was a 0.22.
Mm.
And so that judge was angry at me, and he remanded me into custody for 30 days. So I spent, the moment I got out of rehab, I went to county for 30 days.
Wow.
And so that's an even other stick of like, this is an issue, because I was just basically like, wow, dude, you know, like now I'm sitting in county because of this for 30 days, you know. And what's crazy was, even in county, like I had no problem. Like they actually were brewing, the guys in my bunks were brewing that Pruno stuff in county, and they were offering it to me. And I'm just like, dude, I'm sober, man. I'm not touching anything like that again. So I even was like declaring my sobriety, and the guys actually, even in county, were impressed with the fact of like, I was just like totally done, and was sitting in county willing to be sober the entire time, you know?
I'm impressed too. Yeah. I remember, you know, in rehab, I went to rehab and met a bunch of people that were, you know, did a lot of time, and they were telling me, you know, I got more alcoholic in jail. There was stuff they were brewing in jail, and the booze that they were sneaking in and stuff. So, but was there any meetings while you're in there for 30 days?
No, there weren't any meetings or anything like that. You know, I was just in there for 30 days. But the other thing too, that I never did before, but I also didn't really have anywhere to go, because I was starting to talk to my girlfriend at the time. I didn't have any work. I didn't have anywhere to basically stay. But this was also something that I never tried before, that like I could have maybe tried to find a place someone to live with, you know, but I was just like, no, I'm going to try sober living for the first time, you know, because I hear that like when I was in rehab, a bunch of people were just basically like, dude, sober living really works, but you got to like find a good one. And so I actually found this sober living. I lived in that sober living for 3.5 years, to be honest, you know. Yeah, it was like, and that definitely like helped me a lot, you know. I found it like when I was living where I was living at, when I was living up in the mountains, I was living far away from my daughter. And so I found a sober living that was just like right near her, so that I could start to, because that was the problem too. And like alcoholism, I lost a lot of time with my daughter, and I wanted to start building back my relationship. So I wanted to be in a place where I can be like as close to her as possible, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I ended up in sober living for 3.5 years.
And now we're recording a podcast from your daughter's room, which I think is beautiful.
Yeah, it's the first, honestly, now it's like, you know, what ended up happening that's crazy is like when I was living in that sober living, I went back to grad school. I earned I earned a master's degree in like a whole new like subject, so that like I could start to rebuild a career. I got into like a whole new like career that like I love. It's what's crazy is it's still in education, but now I'm doing like data analysis. I like analyze data for schools.
Yeah.
And like what's cool about being in this room is that for the first time, and I can't even remember, I'm able to like have an apartment that has a room for my daughter, so that whenever she comes home over, she can actually like have her own place to actually like stay in. It feels like I can't believe it. Feels so good when she comes here, and to have her just be in her room and like wake up in her room and like her hang out in the room, and knowing that like I'm able to give that to her now in my recovery, when like I couldn't even get close to giving that to her when I was, come on, you can't, I couldn't provide for her, give her a good place when I'm constantly losing jobs because I'm drunk all the time.
It's just, and these are the stories that I love to talk to, and I love to hear. Everyone loves a comeback story, right? Everyone loves a story of redemption, right? But here you are, you get sober and you stick with it. You realize that that's the problem. You stick with it, even in county. You go to sober living, which I think is a great idea, especially, you, again, now you're given that gift of clarity and self-awareness, and you're like, let me find a place because I need to stay sober. And what do? You go back to school, and you go a slightly different career path, but again, a complete 180. You completely change your life around. And, you go from, 5 years, a little over 5 years ago, not being able to be a good dad to your daughter, to now you have your own place and your daughter has her own room and you're an author now.
Yeah.
And, we read your bio. We were laughing offline about how our bios have changed, right? And in a pretty quick, short order, actually, in some cases, like yours, like 5 years is, your story is amazing, but in short order, you're a published author now. And how do you get into Stoicism? How do you start going so deep into that?
So what happened was, when I was in rehab, or not rehab, when I was at sober living, I watched kind of like this documentary on this subject of minimalism, and I walked out and I was like talking to one of my roommates in like sober living, and I was just like, man, I just watched this like good documentary on minimalism. And he's like, that's kind of like a part of this philosophy that's called like Stoicism. Like, he read a little bit about it before, and he's like, oh, you should really like kind of look into it. I guess my path as being an author like starts with my sober living experience, because yeah, he basically, he told me like, you should look into like this philosophy. And so I just kind of do what everybody does, and like, you just start Googling stuff, and I start reading about it, and I'm just like kind of blown away. I'm just like kind of like blown away by what it's saying. And so I just start buying books on the subject. I just start buying books. What's crazy about this philosophy is it's like 2,000 years old. It dates back to ancient Greece. Ancient Rome is where it like really developed. But some of the written work that like existed in that time has actually survived all of these years, so that you can actually still buy those books like on bookshelves. So I was reading like the ancient Stoics, but then there's like been kind of like this movement over like the last like 30-40 years, where all of these people like have started looking into it and realized that it's just as valid in modern society. And so there's like this modern Stoic movement. So you can find all of these modern books that are basically on the subject, because basically what it's really, all it's trying to do is like look at, well, what is the purpose of life? Like, what is the purpose of a good life? And for me now in recovery, it's kind of this interesting thing where now in recovery, I started looking back on issues that I was having in my addiction. And I realized that there was a lot of emptiness inside of me. There was always like, it always seemed like something was missing. I had no guidance, nowhere to go. I just kind of just did things because you're supposed to do them. I went to school because you're supposed to go to school. I got the career because you're supposed to get the career. I married because you're supposed to get married, and I never really saw a purpose to anything. And this basically is like looking at, well, what is the purpose for a good life? And what's crazy is the Stoics, they basically said that the purpose for a good life is to be a virtuous person, excellence of character. And for me, like I looked back and I'm just like, Could anything describe me better than someone having horrible characteristics in my addiction? You know, that in recovery, to be a person with excellence of character is definitely a path that I would want to go down. And so that's what got me interested in it. But then the thing that also tripped me out the most too is, and the reason why I know that it could be so good for people in recovery, and why there's others out there who found that it helped with their recovery, is it hardcore goes into the serenity prayer. Like it literally has the serenity prayer like hardcore written into it, you know? And it's not what they say, it's not so much, they're not looking about like, you know, the things you can change and the things that you cannot change. They talk about the things that you can control and the things that you cannot control.
Yeah.
And what's kind of interesting is they're kind of just like, well, the things that you can control are the things that you can change in life, but it's actually very, very little. Like you can control your opinion of things. You get to decide if something's good or bad.
Yeah.
Like your opinion is all up to you. You get to control the decisions that you basically make on an everyday basis. You get to control what you desire, what you choose to want in the world. You also get to control what you want to avoid. It's like I kind of say in my book, like, you know, we get to choose to avoid like that we don't want to do like our addiction anymore. I make that conscious choice to avoid my DOCs every single day. And I choose to desire sobriety in my life. Those are decisions up to me that I can make every single day. But realistically, beyond those things, like you don't have control over anything like else really. Like you just have to learn acceptance. Like one of the reasons why I realized that it's really, really good in recovery, the one that I thought like really helped me out was a couple ones that I thought that really helped me out was oftentimes in addiction, we can try to control other people. We want people to do what we want them to do. We want them to act in the way that we want them to act. And like Stoicism is basically like you cannot control another person. They're their own person. They have their own thoughts, their own decisions. You literally better learn to accept whatever the hell anyone does and whatever the hell anyone says, you know. And that's what's cool. It becomes a good practice in also dealing with negative emotions. If you can learn to accept everyone, everything they do, everything that they say, because you understand that you have no control over them, you will find that you will have less negative emotions in life. Because think about how many of your negative emotions are triggered by other people and you simply not accepting what they were doing or saying, you know?
100%. You know, we have no control over people, places, or things.
Yeah.
And that in sobriety too. And you said the word acceptance a bunch of times in a row. It's one of my favorite prayers is the acceptance prayer, you know, and that is a powerful prayer for me. And when I'm in a bad spot, and when I say a bad spot, I don't mean like I feel like I'm going to have a drink, but I'm in a bad spot and I have resentments and I'm pissed off and people, places, or things are not going the way that Gary wants them to go. And I need to turn things over to me. I turn them over to my higher power, to the universe. I literally hand over those problems to the universe. It goes back to what you said. I have no control over these people, places, and things. And I love what you're saying about, you know, the Stoic philosophy and the serenity prayer. For those that don't know, you know, I'm going to say it quick, you know, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. A couple hours ago, I say it almost every single day.
Yeah.
Sometimes early on in sobriety, I had to say it all day long just to stay sober for that minute. Bringing up so many good things like, you know, you know, we can't control it. And you mentioned our emotions, like it's up to us. I can decide, like someone can do something, but it's really, and I learned this in sobriety, like it's up to me whether I give that person or that thing the power to negatively affect me. You know, I get to decide whether I'm going to care or whether I'm not going to care, whether I'm going to be happy about it, whether I'm going to be sad. it's up to me. But sometimes my ego wants to take it and run with it, my self-centered ego. And that's where I go down the rabbit hole, and I have to kind of work my way out of it.
One of the fascinating things that could always help with anyone that struggles with that, with those emotions, one of the most fascinating Stoic things that I read, which was this one of the ancient Roman ones, Epictetus, he basically pointed out that whenever you let someone kind of, their actions, their words, their behaviors, whenever you let them cause negative emotions to you, like negative emotions inside of you, you have basically turned your mind over to them. You have basically become a slave to them. They own your mind, and they own basically what's going on inside of you. And kind of like what he was sort of pointing out is that you have the choice to set yourself free from this slavery. But the longer, and the reason why I kind of like that is what fascinates me about getting angry about someone, like with what they said or did, is it's just like, here's this person that's angering me, and I'm giving them control over my body. Why the heck would I want to give someone that is angering me control? I'm just going to choose to set myself free and just not let them have that control anymore over me. And that was just
powerful.
One
saying, yeah, it is. Let me ask you, how do you have it like a way? How do you do that? Like, I just had someone recently in my life that really been bothering me, and I've been actually staying up at night thinking about him. And I know all this, like, and I call my sponsor on it, and I prayed for this guy, and you know what? It helps. But you have, you're an author on this. So how do you work through it? How do you get, because you're a human being also. So I'm still sure you have emotions, and sometimes you get upset. And how do you work through them? Like, what's your strategy? How, or someone that's listening, how can they work through it?
Well, there's basically two kind of ways that I work through it that I learned through this philosophy. The first, I would say, are people that you basically know. Oftentimes we have people that we know. They might be friends, they might be family members, they might be co-workers, things like that,
Right.
that might anger or irritate us or do things that bother us. And one of the things that I guess it's even a chapter in my book is, I call it expect the expected. Whenever you basically actually come across this person, you already know how they're going to act. You already know what they're going to say. You already know what they're going to do. Just basically tell yourself, like, I can expect that they're going to do this. They're going to do this thing that, like, is going to try to irritate me. They're going to act in this certain way. And, like, if they're, you know what, I'm going to already go into this with them expecting them to do that. So it's kind of funny that, like, when you kind of prepare yourself ahead of the situation of knowing that they're going to act that way, you kind of laugh at it, because you're just like, well, there they go doing it, you know? Yeah, makes sense. And when it happens to, like, people that you don't know, let's say, like someone that you don't know that, like, says or does something that irritates you, it's another practice that I kind of write about in my book, which is called consider the source. If you don't know this person, like if you know somebody and they say something critical to you, something that might actually anger you a little bit, if you trust that person's opinion, you know that they have like a really good opinion, that they're a trustworthy person, like a sponsor can sometimes be kind of like a little harsh to you, but you trust their opinion. Don't get angry at it. Consider the source and just take the criticism and, like, respect the fact that it's just trying to make you a better person. But if it's someone that you don't know, why the hell are you going to get, like, angry about something that someone that you don't know says? You don't even know this person. They have no clue what the hell they're saying about you. They don't even know you. And it's also this other thing that is kind of interesting. And it's like another thing that we have to understand that we don't control in, like, one of those things that falls under another category of what we don't control is we don't control our reputation. We don't control what other people will think of us. You have to understand that the opinion of someone, what they're going to say about you, however they're going to view you, you actually have no control over that itself, And so it's just kind of understanding all of those different aspects. And I really draw it out a lot more in the book. There's a lot of interesting stuff on like how this works, but I guess those are kind of like a couple simple ways that people could actually benefit from like this philosophy. I also have one other thing that I think I would like to leave for like the listeners that
go
is
for it.
So one other thing too that I found about this philosophy that was really good for me in my recovery was the Stoics actually had a very interesting way of building gratitude. And it became to be known as this thing called negative visualization, And what they kind of said is what you should start doing is imagine you losing every single thing in your life, So for me right now, I imagine me losing my apartment. I imagine me losing my wife, my relationship I'm in. I imagine losing my relationship with my daughter. I imagine losing my car. I imagine losing every single possession I have. I imagine basically losing everything. And in fact, when I practice negative visualization, I bring myself back to that field. And I bring myself back to that field and I go, where I had nothing. And they basically say, imagine yourself losing everything that you have right now. And what I want you to do is think about what you're going to do now that you don't have any of these things. It starts building resiliency because it makes you start to think about, well, what would I do if I lost everything? How would I recover from that? But then number two, what they also say is, well, think about how grateful you should be that you haven't lost all those things and that you have them in your life right now at this present moment. You should be grateful for all of those things that you have because you could lose them. Because that was another thing that this philosophy says is that you could lose them easily. Because I have to remind myself of that in my own sobriety is because, yes, I'm sober today, but I can't get full of myself about that. I could relapse. I could lose it in a snap of a finger and be right back to a field staring at a freeway with nothing in my life, So I'm going to be grateful for everything I have today because I can imagine what it would be like if I lost them all again.
That's really interesting to me. I'm thinking about how I think through things, and I never call it negative visualization. And complete honesty, as you're saying, it puts some fear in me because I don't like to think that. I don't. But let me hear me out for a second. You mentioned you go back to where you were in the field. What I do all the time is, and I say this, is don't forget where you came from. Like, don't forget where you were, and I am completely, I know for a fact that, if I'm sober and I'm working my program and I'm doing the right thing, I have a shot. If I go back out there, dude, like it's all gone. It's all gone.
Yeah, I get it.
I say that, but I'm 49 years old. I have family that is my life. And so, you mentioned gratitude. I start my morning every day in prayer. I said a prayers, but part of my prayers also is gratitude. And I'm thanking my higher power for me, my higher power for family. Thank you for our health. Thank you for all of it. But I have, fears, and a lot of them are like fear financial fears, or for the most part, projections into a future that hasn't happened yet. Right. So that's when it can be bad sometimes. But what I do is I'm not going to say the word negative visualization, but maybe it's what I'm doing in a roundabout way. I say, you know what, if something happens, I'll figure it out. As long as, I'm here, I'm sober. Yes, I'm sober. I'm here. I got my family, and we'll figure it out. We'll go from there. So you're saying these words, these terms that I'm not ready to, and I'm not disagreeing with you at all. Please know that.
No.
I feel like perhaps I label them a little bit differently.
Some people argue about the term negative visualization. They just call it negative visualization because the negative part is the minusing the things out of your life. Is just thinking if you lost those things. But I was saying with your issues that you have right there, you should probably definitely read into Stoicism because they do, like I said, they do a lot of stuff on the negative emotions that we have. And a lot of the philosophy does talk about the fear of the future that we have. And they do point out the fact of what's kind of interesting is what they go into, because I would have the same problem is projecting out into the future. And they would like, it kind of like what would be discussed is like, why are you torturing yourself today for something that may never happen. And then they even say this, which is, let's say it does happen. You've tortured yourself twice. You tortured yourself in the day and then in the future.
You know,
yeah.
I'll bring up my guy too, my sponsor. He says to me, you know, he's 10 years my senior, but he says to me all the time, he says, Gary, I wasted so much time worried about stuff that never, ever happened. And that line really sticks with me a lot. And then, you know, you're talking about living in the moment, living in today. It's like, I love that famous poem. It's been, you know, regurgitated in so many different ways. I'm going to butcher it right now, but it's like, you know, yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery. That's why, you know, living today is a gift. That's why it's called the present. And really, it's hard to do, you know, so it's for me, it's very hard to just say, okay, just live in this 24 hours. But when I am just living in this 24 hours and I'm not worried about tomorrow or next month or whatever, what have you, I'm in such a better place mentally, you know, and that comes with a lot of other stuff, you know, meditation. I'll meditate. When I meditate in the morning, for the most part, my days are a lot more calmer and a lot more, they're a lot better. You know, I can kind of handle them. When I'm not, and I'm running around and, you know, my things aren't going my way, I can go down the rabbit hole quickly.
Yeah. No, I think it's all about living in the present. That's why, that poem exists and stuff like that. The Stoics talk about living in the present. They have a bunch of techniques that help you do it, you know, but it's not like I'm perfect at it. I think one of the things too that I loved about the philosophy is it's a progress, not perfection philosophy. It's basically like, they're just like, you're never going to be perfect. You're human. You're never they call like perfection like the sage. Throughout all of the works they say like you'll never be a sage. You'll never be perfect.
Right. Nor do I want to be but there is a path, a spiritual path that I do want to hopefully, I don't want to say arrive, because I've come to the realization like I don't think there's like arriving or like graduating. I think like you look back, I'll speak for myself. I feel like I look back over the past, you know, whatever, call it 10, 15, 17 years, and you say, wow, I've really come somewhere. I've really changed something. It's not like you pass a finish line and you're like, oh, okay, I got to that, you know, spiritual well-being. Like, what's next? You know, I don't think that's how it goes. But you know, you bring it up. I'm laughing too, because I have one of those books. It's Marcus Aurelius is, you know, I think it's probably one of the most famous books. And in all fairness, I think I bought that book like 15 years ago, not even, you know, really knowing what Stoicism is. So I thank you for that. I got to do some research in the past couple of weeks looking into it. And, you know, it's super interesting. And I love how you tied this all to recovery, because you're saying so much stuff that is in recovery. You know, you just said progress, not perfection. And we talked about the acceptance and the acceptance prayer. I mean, there's so much there. And, you know, I love, and this isn't Stoicism, but it's an idea that I have, and it's in the rooms in recovery. Practice these principles in all our affairs, you know, not just the affairs that work for me. Right. And back to like, if someone's wronged me, right? Like I need to practice these principles in all our affairs, you know, and love and tolerance is our code, right? That means it's got to be our code always, not, you know, 98% of the time, because that 2% I don't like, and I'm gonna act like Gary. Gary's gonna handle this one, you know, like that's not how it goes. You really, again, I'm talking for myself. You know, I got to practice these principles in all our affairs. But so, where can we find your book?
You can find my book on Amazon is like the main site to find it. You can also find it on Barnes and Nobles, but I got it kind of out there where you could Google search it and find it in different places like Walmart. Apparently, you can find it online at Walmart and stuff like that. But you know, Amazon's generally the best place. But just Google search a Stoic guidebook for recovery, and there's various places you can find it.
Well, we're gonna put all the links on our page once this comes out, and we're going to blast it out. And what do you want to leave our listeners with? One last final thought.
I guess the last final thought, and this is for the people that might be early into recovery. I want to leave this thought to them, especially with what we talked about today, where life gets at, you know. I know that it can seem like things aren't moving fast enough. that they're just, like the problem with it is you get that first early recovery and you want everything back. You're just like, why is, am I not, when I was in my sober living, why am I not getting this place? Why are my relationships not coming back fast enough? Why am I not getting this? I need this back. I need that back. And you kind of look at all of the things that you lost and you want them back in your life as quick as possible. And the only thing that I can basically say is that just take your time. Take your time to grow. Take your time to grow in your recovery, and that things do come back. You may not get everything back. Some things might be lost. You might have some relationships that you burnt them off, and you have to learn to accept that, but life does get better. And that, like, even someone like me, I look at it and it's just like 5 years, if you really think about it, is not a long amount of time, but I could not even fathom in my early days of recovery where I would be 5 years later. Like you said, like a new career, my own place, married, my relationships back, a published book, I couldn't even fathom it. And it's 5 years. And so that's my message to the people early into recovery that might be listening to this, is that life does get better. Just give it some time. And the life that you might be wishing to have right now, you might find a couple years from now, it's not the same way, but it's perfectly the life that you want to have.
I love that. I think that is such an important message too. It's like, hang on there. And, we put ourselves through a lot of, ourselves through a lot, and we have incredible stories, right? And some of them are really bad, rock bottom, but just hang on, things get better. And as you were giving that beautiful message, which I really do love to close with that, but it reminds me of, it's another kind of prayer, but I've heard this in the rooms, is when you ask your higher power, you ask God for something, he has 3 answers for you. One is yes, one is, not now. And the third answer is no, I have something better for you. So just hang on, something more is coming. And, I really appreciate, that was a good closer. And I'm glad that you reached out to the newcomer, because those are the most important people.
Yeah, that's why, like, I did it. It's because even though it's been 5 years, it's just like, it's a flash of time that I can remember how it was, so I love speaking to the newcomers for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Derek, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it. Like I said, we were going to put a Stoic guidebook for recovery. You can find it on Amazon, and you do post, right? It's the Sober Stoic on Instagram. We can find you as well.
Yes, that's the Sober Stoic. That's where you can find me.
Sober Stoic. We're going to put all the links on our show notes. Go look for a Stoic guidebook for recovery. It'll be here, or it'll be on Amazon. Derek, great to meet you today. Thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate you sharing your story. I appreciate you recovering out loud like this, and your message is super important, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Like I said, fan of the show. So it's been great speaking to your audience.
Appreciate it very much. We will talk soon, my friend.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in to another powerful episode of the Begin Again podcast. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. We hope that today's conversation has ignited a spark within you, affirming that recovery is not only attainable, but can also be a wellspring of strength and resilience. Our ultimate goal is to make a difference in someone's life every single day. By sharing these stories of redemption, we strive to empower you and inspire you to unlock your fullest potential, facilitate positive transformations, and contribute to creating a better future for yourself, for your loved ones, and the world at large. If you know someone who could benefit from listening to our show, please share it with them. And if you resonate with our mission and feel compelled to do so, we would greatly appreciate your support through a 5-star review, following us on Instagram, and subscribing to our YouTube channel, The Begin Again Podcast. The more positive reviews we receive and the wider our message spreads, the greater our collective ability to help others realize that change is possible in their own lives. Thank you once again for being a part of our community. May you be blessed on your own journey of personal growth and transformation.